Hello, welcome to the third episode of the unofficial PopCap PopCast. I'm Isaac Aubrey.
And I'm Steve Notley.
Cool, Steve. What is the unofficial PopCap podcast? What is the unofficial? Okay, and cool, Steve. What is the unofficial PopCap podcast?
Isaac, the unofficial PopCap podcast is a podcast about the golden age of PopCap games by two guys who were there at the time and collected paychecks and saw maybe not all of it, but quite a bit of it.
It was a scene.
Yeah.
As always, we emphasize the unofficial part. We do not speak for EA or PopCap Games or PopCap Games under EA. We're just a couple guys who worked at a cool place many years ago and thought folks would be interested in hearing about it. Steve, so what is this episode about? What's it called?
Well, I think this episode we're going to call it The Rise and Fall of Pig Up. So that is a game that like spoilers, did not eventually come out fully from PopCap, but it's one that Isaac, you and I both worked on. We've got a whole tale to tell about it. And the reason we're talking about this unreleased game for our third episode is just because we feel, and we hope our listeners agree, that it actually sort of relates to a lot of the stuff that we're kind of all about at this podcast, which is just how game development happens, how it happens within the context of particularly an indie company that was right at the cusp of being bought by, a gigantic game company, and how the decisions were made. And so we hope it'll be a fun story. And so that's the plan. How do you feel about that?
Awesome.
So, I'll start by just talking about the prologue, which in my mind is basically this idea that for a long time there had just been this idea of doing a game called When Pigs Fly. I think it was just Jason had just thought that would be a cool name for a game. And so I know that there had been some attempt, at least one prior attempt, to make a game called When Pigs Fly before Josh Langley, did his. I think, now I could be wrong about that, but what I know for certain is that Josh Langley took a swing at this. So let's talk a little bit about Josh Langley. So I'll just say about him that he is one of these sort of master video game creators because he has the ability to make game ready art and can code. So that's one of these kinds of double threats, and obviously has a sense of design as well. So he is one of these kinds of rare people who can actually make an entire game on his own.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is a very rare ability, and he's excellent at it, right? Of course, the biggest game that he was responsible for that people would have known from PopCap, at least, would be Heavy Weapon. Which I'm not sure if it's still at the Epic Game or the Steam or not. And I think there was an Xbox version.
Yeah,
it's just just the totally over the top shooter. You're a tank, and you just play through all these levels, and each level you upgrade this or that thing, and by the end it's just this utterly absurd playing.
I think they're calling them bullet hell these days, but it was a very at the time it was just a very 80s arcade experience.
Yeah, it was a very Raiden kind of if that means anything to players. Raiden was a bullet hell coin op game. And so Josh made Heavy Weapon, and then he took a swing at When Pigs Fly. So now we're going to plan on having some footage of that When Pigs Fly. And so that was kind of inspired, at least in part, by a game called Burrito Bison is what the game was called.
There you go.
And that was one. And both of these games were what I would call kind of a canon game, in the sense that the majority of the gameplay is by setting up your cannon shot. You're kind of adjusting the angle, and then you're clicking on something and a meter goes up and down. You want to click at the point where the meter is at the highest, and then you get launched. And that is then, at least for this Burrito Bison game and in Josh's When Pigs Fly, is the majority of the gameplay, right? Because then it just launches the pig, and sort of flies through the air, and then you're just trying to get the greatest amount of distance, and you don't really have a lot of control over what happens to you when you're in the air. It's a little odd because like in Josh's, and this may sort of ultimately lead to why that version of it didn't go further in development, but like was that like you had a certain amount of jet fuel, but that was just like a finite amount. You could just use it, and then it would just run out when it ran out. And you could also sort of like change the orientation of the pig by kind of mousing up or mousing down, but the direction your pig was facing as you were flying through the air didn't actually make a difference,
Hmm. Hmm.
or it only made sort of a partial difference.
Well, I remember builds of it early on where you could literally wait till the cannon was all the way down and just shoot yourself at the ground and go boom, 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 and your game was over. So it
Yeah,
gave you a potential for just like dying instantly, which was a little odd. And there are other kind of like, and or you could shoot it too high up, and then you wouldn't really get a lot of distance, and you would just kind of like have some really high bounces early on, but not, there was definitely a spot in between there where you wanted to pull the trigger on things. But I think that might have been part of the issue with it early on, is that was just a weird one for people to grab onto that
I, I
mechanic.
I would say. I mean, it's
Mhm.
interesting because, like, in principle, I mean,
Simple.
right. I mean, like, the idea that you've got a game where you're sort of front loading the player input to the beginning of the thing, and then you're sort of watching the rest of it play out is kind of counterintuitive. But we already had Peggle by then, which was very much that kind of thing where it's like, look, you've got this turret at the top, you fire the ball, you aim, you fire the ball, and the ball starts bouncing through the field of pegs and bricks, and
I
and you
yeah.
just watched that happen. And there was a concern at the time. It's like, well, you're not interacting with it enough,
Hmm.
But it's
Hmm.
like, but we had the sense at the time to go, yeah, but there's something really compelling about watching the ball make its way down the board, right? Like you had a great deal of control at the start of its journey, but then after a few bounces, you were just kind of a spectator, and you could live in that spectator space and not be kind of twitchy because you weren't doing anything about it. There'd be people going like, "Well, I want to be able to control the bucket at the bottom." It's like, no, 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 no. You don't want to control the bucket. You want to just be able to kind of get zen with the ball's journey, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
it was a
so
lot to get people to buy into, for sure. It was a strange one for folks, but finally, I think that the design won people over. I mean, I think that's one thing that's kind of consistent through a lot of PopCap games is that they can be kind of meditative. There's space in there for a player to sit and kind of think about what they're doing, or to just sit back and watch things happen and just kind of
mhm.
enjoy. It doesn't have to be a constant interactive, like intense, fighting experience. It's
Right. Constant inputs and constant clicking, though that can be fun too, right? But so, and I think the problem with When Pigs Fly was that it was sort of it wasn't very fully seated and comfortable in that space because you just didn't you wanted to be able to have more control over the pig while the pig was in flight, and you just
Mhm.
sort of had an amount of control that just sort of ultimately felt unsatisfying rather than, oh, I'm mostly watching, but I can intervene a little bit, which just ultimately didn't feel good, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so I think that's my take on why that version didn't necessarily, go further into development. But one thing that was very crucial about that uh, version of the game, so this is like When Pigs Fly, was that Matt Holmberg, superstar artist Matt Holmberg, who will come up in our story later, did a bunch of art for it, right? Like a bunch of background art, a bunch of pig art, a bunch of object art. So there's like a really good, great little animations of the pig flying and all this sort of stuff, which meant that there was like sort of an asset base already existing. So, and again, that will kind of come into play later on. So now, for me, the story kind of goes off in a different direction of several steps. Where the first step was what I just call flash game programming for dummies, which was I can't remember exactly what I was doing. It was probably in the middle of Prince of Toys slash Pop War, which maybe another episode. But I was like, okay, I'm writing stuff. I was like designing levels for Peggle nights, and I just got this book, this Flash game programming for dummies, and was like a literal for dummies book with like the black and yellow cover, and just started going through it and just downloading the assets and just doing all the exercises one by one. Which and so it's programming, game programming, technically scripting, I guess. It was action script was sort of the method by which you would automate stuff in Flash. It's a real sad thing that Flash has just been like purged from the internet. There are all
Too
these
many
like Swift.
security holes, or I'm not really sure. It's just
Yeah, I think it was ultimately a security concern, but it's like quite crazy the extent to which, like, I think Mac. I could be wrong about this, but I believe current Mac computers like have a chip, part of which the very engineering of the chip is that it will not allow like Flash files to be played. That's I guess that's how much of a concern it was that this fun, interesting file format that allowed animations as well as games and all sorts of stuff that you could just host on a website be eliminated with prejudice.
even back when we were really going hard on Flash, there was talk of Adobe killing it, and there's all these issues. And the ActionScript 3 came along, which is a way to interact with it. And even then, there was like people struggled with it, and there was talk of Flash dying, and it was just like it was under assault for a long time before it finally truly went away.
Yeah. But I was lucky enough to be in that era when it still existed, it could be used, and it was a really great way to sort of dip your toe into actually making games, super simple ones, but it's just like, okay, I can open a thing, I can make a project, I can create a thing, I can place images, I can manipulate them, I can set up a control scheme, I can do some basic game physics of moving stuff around and accelerating and gravity and this and that. Which is, I mean, I'm not sure where we are today with that kind of thing being available for people, right? Like right now, there's the high end stuff like Unreal Engine, Unity, which are very intimidating to get into. And my personal beef with both of those is that, like, and then you've heard me rail on about this before, but it's like you download Unreal Engine and go, okay, I'm going to teach myself how to do this. There's a whole internet's worth of tutorial material, and then you rapidly discover that all the tutorial material is out of date because they fiddled with the user interface, 2 months ago, and now all the stuff in the tutorial just doesn't describe the program anymore. Uh, and I'm not sure what is on the other end. Like there's Game Maker's Toolkit, I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. Yeah, there's that. Babylon JS has got a great editor for it now, and if you can kind of figure out the web environment angle of it, how to host it, do that sort of thing, it really opens up a pretty cool game making platform there that is straight to web. It's very cool.
So yeah, I mean, like there's so what I had access to was Flash, and even though Flash has sort of gone away, just for our listeners, there are other things that allow a kind of a similar path as to what I was doing then, of just like dipping your toe in and just learning super basic basics, a little bit at the time in bite-sized chunks. And so I've been just going through this and doing the exercises and kind of getting really excited. It's like, oh, look, Ma, I'm coding. Not really coding. It's technically scripting, but I'm creating functions. I'm doing some math. I'm assigning characteristics to objects and manipulating those
Making a pig
characteristics.
fly.
Yeah, so that then led to we would have game jams, right? So maybe we'll just talk a little bit about like what the game jam. I mean, people have heard of game jams. So basically, at PopCap, at least, my understanding was just like it's an opportunity to just allow people across the company to participate in the fun of making games who weren't necessarily in this or that role, right? So just be so for this particular game jam, as we recall, it was like you signed up, you just got into a team, and then they had a video game name generator, and it just spat out random names for games. And I think you got to pick, like, I think it spat out like 10 names, and then you would get into like a team. You'd pick a name, and then you'd have like a week to make like a kit bash fast version of this game, like some kind of playable something. So I volunteered to do the game jam, but I was sort of going, okay, and I'm going to be the programmer. I'm not a programmer, like I'm just a writer, but I have this Flash programming action script background. So I can't do a hyper complicated thing, but I can move an object around the screen. I can detect collisions. I can, so that's what my role will be for the game. That what our team was, and I remember a guy named Monty McCallis. I'm certainly mispronouncing his last name, but he was the artist. So we picked the name Michael Jackson Unicycle Daredevil. And so it was like, okay, well, in our first meeting, it's like, all right, we're going to make a Michael Jackson Unicycle Daredevil game, and I will just lay out, like, here are my limitations as a video game programmer, which are they don't extend much beyond being able to move an object around the screen and detect collisions. So, but Monty, bless him, he was very good. He was an artist and he could create a lot of stuff in Flash. So we made this great little animated clip of a Michael Jackson on a unicycle, and then
Totally normal game. I
yeah,
mean,
and then for me, I always sort of felt that the best way to approach making a game was to start with the controls.
mhm.
Like, find an interesting way to move something around the screen. Something that's a little bit more interesting than just, okay, well, it just mirrors your mouse position. So if you move the mouse around, then the object moves around. Done. Right? Which is very easy to do in ActionScript, but it's like, okay, let's do something a little bit more interesting. So this mechanic here was that you could move left and right with the mouse, and then you could click and it would bounce. It would jump up and then it would fall. And so that was a method whereby you could move this unicycling Daredevil around the screen in a slightly different way, in a slightly more interesting way than just mousing to that position on the screen. And then it was just like, and I don't even remember at this point, but there were things that you wanted to collide with, and there were things you wanted to not collide with. And they would come streaming in from the side of the screen, and your job is you were just trying to get through these three stages. So yeah, we did that. We put the game together. It worked. I don't think we won the game jam. I think the game jam at that time, I think, was probably what the hell was it? It became Unpleasant Horse. I think the name that came out of the generator had another word in it. It was like Unpleasant Horse. Kind of won the game jam, and then I think I had at least some additional development, right? Like people were like, oh, it's not a bad little game. Let's maybe, and I think it's some version of eventually became available on iPad, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's where it finally landed. And that's
So,
you can find evidence of that on YouTube. I think there's Unpleasant Horse gameplay up on YouTube
mhm.
somewhere.
And that was actually a pretty fun little game because, as I recall, it was much more like you would tap. You'd have your horse. You'd be sitting on a cloud. There'd be other clouds. I think if you sat on a cloud too long, the cloud would disappear. So you had to keep tapping clouds as they came into the screen to keep moving, right? And I think there were other horses that were flying around, and you could
Yeah, and you would just
jump
punk
on
them down
them.
into the ground.
Hence the unpleasantness of the horse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the whole business of the game jam. So once that was all sort of done, I was like, okay, well, I like this mechanic. I like moving around in the screen and being able to jump. So I'm gonna take a crack at When Pigs Fly on my own spare time, I guess. Just in my own cycles, extra cycles at PopCap. And the great thing, of course, was that because of the When Pigs Fly that Josh had made, and then Matt had done all this art for, so it was already possible to just not be starting from zero. It's like I've already got pig art, right? I can take in pig art and swap between like pig flack up, flip, arms up, down, and backgrounds and sound effects. So already had like a lot of stuff that I could just directly pull from and code, or at least in this very simplistic scripting coding method, right? So my big takeaway was that I wanted to get away from that whole like everything relies on you getting the perfect launch. Because I was like, no, that because for the biggest reason is just because if you don't get the perfect launch, then you're like, no matter what happens for the rest of that run, you feel like, yeah, but it would have been even better if I got the perfect launch, right? And so that just sucked. I was like, let's just take the launch out of the equation. We'll just have you just start, bang, and you're in the air. And then the whole game is supposed to be about making a living in the air, right? So the basic concepts were you get up into the sky and then you're trying to make a living in the sky. You've got a finite number of flaps. You're always falling, but if you click, you flap and you move up again. And so the way to stay in the air is to catch. There are apples, flapples coming along, and you have to collide with the flapples, right? And every time you get a flapple, you get an extra flap. You're in the air a little bit longer. And some flapples are bigger; they have more flaps. And then there are enemies. They come along as well. Bees, as it turned out, they're the bees. One of like the side joke about Ed was like, "Well, why bees?" And it's like, why not bees? Like, do you want to collide with the bee? Like, I think a bee is a fairly intuitive thing to not want to collide with. But for some reason, one of the higher executives found that a puzzling metaphor. But so there we go. It was basically so that was it. It was just like you flap to stay in the air. You're trying to stay in the air as long as possible. You're colliding with flapples and you're avoiding enemies. And two more concepts. One is if you flew up higher off the top of the screen, that would increase your multiplier. So now your score, you always had a running score of distance, right? And you made points for everything you did. But if you went higher, then it was like times 2, times 3, times 4. Each time you go up, then you're just like, oh, you're constantly yearning to get higher up in the sky to get your multiplier bigger. But it was also more difficult to make a living there. Fewer flapples, more enemies, more aggressive enemies. And then over time, like basically, I think every 10 or 12 seconds, sort of behind the hood, the difficulty would be pushed downwards towards the ground. So after like about a minute, even at the times 1 level, you'd be facing the kinds of threats that you would have been facing at the times 10. So it's like get up there as fast as you can and then stay up there as long as you can. Oh, and then the other key thing, of course, was Hogwarts. And so from a game perspective, it's like I always like something where it's like you kind of get a temporary burst of superpowers.
Totally.
Like the comics inspiration. I don't know. Readers are familiar with the Asterix the Gaul comics from Belgium, where he has the magic potion. He can drink the magic potion, and then he beats the hell out of a bunch of Roman soldiers. Uh,
Turns into the Hulk for a minute. Yeah.
yeah, and of course, then the obvious video game antecedent to this idea is Pac-Man, right? You're in the maze, you're eating dots, you're being chased by these ghosts, but when you grab the power pill, you turn the tables, and you eat the ghosts, right? And
Totally.
so it's
It's like a
awesome.
quad damage in Quake.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
so the gameplay is this sort of trade-off between kind of running and evading, and then pursuing and capturing, right? And so the idea here is that if you can evade the bees long enough, the enemies, your hog wild meter would fill, and then once it filled, a little star would float into the screen, and when you caught that star, you would go Hogwarts. You'd like spin, and you'd be like, and now you could hit the enemies for extra flaps, right? So you'd be really holding out, just going, oh, if I could just hold on for a second longer, I can get the hog wild and then blast a bunch of bees and keep going for another like 30 seconds if you got a good run on blast on colliding with enemies, right? So that was and so there that was it. That was the core of the entire game. Just me making it myself, like with my very limited, action scripting abilities. So then the Christmas party, and this would have been uh, 2010, um, I was talking with Jason again, Jason Kapalka, co-founder of PopCap, and what I was saying to him was I was really having a lot of fun with this game, and other people were playing. And yeah, it's actually kind of fun, but I was like, the problem is that you people click to jump and then they fall, but they're not getting that they can also move the mouse left and right to move the character left and right. So I did what amateur game designers always do, which is I just kept putting bigger and bigger notices going like move mouse right and left, just like flat, like trying to yell at the player like move the mouse right and left to go back and to left and right, like this is a mechanic, it's important, you have to be able to do this in order to avoid all the bees. And Jason was like, why don't you just take it out? And I was like, you can't do that. Like, you need that full degree of freedom to be able to be anywhere on the screen in order to. You need that maximum amount of maneuverability in order for the game to be fun. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I just have to you just have to communicate this idea to the players, and it'll work. And then after that Christmas party, super hammered, I was like, well, I'll show him. Went back to the office, and I went back to the code and was like, well, I know exactly how to. All I have to do is just comment out the part that attaches the mouse input. And then I started playing, and it's like, oh wait, he's right. This is better. Like, it was like such an instant realization. All I do is just like, okay, so now rather than fighting, so this is why I'm telling this part of the story. It was like such an insight for me is don't fight the player's instincts,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's such a common thing for a designer is to go, oh well, this is a really important part of design, and I need the player to understand it, and you just keep pushing it. But if the players are just not doing it, then that's when it really makes sense to do some thinking about your design. And in this case, it was a simple thing to just go, I'm going to take that out of the design and see what happens. And then it was like, oh, now it's just absolutely, it's just like one click that the controller is just not something as simple as just the click. In fact, it was exactly the same control mechanism as Flappy Bird, that game
Hmm.
that came
Hmm.
out and made like just had tens of millions of downloads. And I think the crazy story of that was that the guy who made Flappy Bird decided to just shut it down and stop making money on it because and took it off the app
Absurd.
store. But like Flappy Bird was this big, but again, it was Flappy Bird was just the same thing. It was like you clicked, you were always falling, and if you clicked, you would bounce up, and that was it. And then you just had to sort of navigate this tunnel, right? So this was the exact same mechanics, and also it was like, oh, and now this also makes it an ideal phone game because you're no longer trying to manage a mouse left right input with a click to jump input. It's just a tap. That's it. A
Hmm.
tap or a
Hmm.
tap and hold, and that's the only control. Uh, so so that was my little sort of oh my god moment of like the value of simplifying a design to bring it more in alignment to what the players were actually doing. And so this is all like at the wrap up of 2010. And so then now we're getting into the rise, the real rise, like or what I call development heaven, because in the beginning of the new year, this is 2011. We remind listeners from our previous episode that 6 months in the future, PopCap is destined to be purchased by EA for $750 million. But at the beginning of 2011, they were like, "Okay, let's move this into actual production. Let's move this into real development." And so now this is where your part of the story really kicks in because it's like, okay, let's build a team. And so the team was me as the designer, Matt, bless him, as the artist, and now
Oh, Russ
those are
Tarleton
here. Yeah, yeah.
as well. Actually, yeah, we didn't have Russ just yet, so it was,
Well, right.
and then me kind of
And then you were
like,
the producer, right? So that
yeah.
was the first big thing. Is there was kind of like, so we need a producer, and well, so now you tell your part of the story about like where you were and how you ended on kind of on that ramp into this project.
Well, it was kind of a long and winding story. I'll try to truncate. We were realized that our Flash games on the web that had just been kind of serving as upsells up to that point, like as soon as Facebook started up its games functionality, and we realized we could put those things on Facebook. Our Blitz games started up, and I
Right.
worked on Bejeweled Blitz, and we started learning about just how to allow players to interact with each other in that format.
Leaderboards.
And then that became we started working analytics into that, and then we started up Zoomablitz,
Yep.
and Zoomablitz was one that I was deeply involved in from start to finish, and we really honed our analytics collecting abilities there, and learned how there was a real urge to get that to influence game design, and that's a whole topic into itself. But so at the end of all that, we really figured out our infrastructure for building an online game on Facebook, and so at that same time, you were working on your pig, when pigs flap, I think it was called at first,
Oh,
right?
right, yeah, because that was one of the things that I did as I was working on this little goofy Flash prototype of When Pigs Fly. Is like, oh, I'm gonna make it When Pigs Flap. That was
Yeah,
my
yeah.
other like crucial innovation, was to
The
change the
ever-changing
name.
world of this poor pig just getting
Is just
passed around like a cheap
to distinguish it
pig.
from the other When Pigs Fly game, but also just because it's like, well, like when pigs fly is like is a common phrase, and I get why you
Mhm.
would go, oh, but it's like, well, let's have our name of our game not just be the same as this common phrase, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like movies that are called like Point of Impact or something,
Mhm.
where it's like, so that's, you're just using a regular phrase as the name of your movie or your game, like you don't want to do that. Or Line of Sight.
Yeah, give it,
Like,
yeah, give it a little twist.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
So,
this was the When Pigs Flap project was now sort of gearing up,
yeah,
and
and
you were brought in to be the producer, and you're like, this is
mhm.
fucking awesome. Like you were coming off of this of all this experience you had working on the Facebook Blitz games, um, and then, as you say, what we lacked at that time then was, okay, so now who's going to be programming this? Because like it was, everybody knew that it was like I was good enough to prototype this prototype, but we needed somebody who actually really knew action script. So
Yeah, so we hired a new coder on named Russ, and he really killed it. He was really good at the action script and was able to just kind of rebuild the game from the ground up, make it a lot more performant, and put in a lot of the hooks that we needed at the time for figuring out what people are doing in the game and what was working, and would allow us to tune it better. It was a really high speed sort of thing. Like we'd through the Blitz games, we'd created all this infrastructure, database backend infrastructure, and we were plugged into the analytics team, and we learned what we need from them, and they learned what they needed from us, and we managed to create this great relationship with just kind of everything that would make Pig Up work in a blitz styled environment on Facebook, and then
right,
where it goes from there. Obviously, that we even determined at that point the next place after Facebook is mobile.
yeah,
If
like
it's successful in one place, then
yeah, it wasn't called Pick Up at that point. That was a later. It was still When
yeah,
Pigs Flap, but I
still
think.
still when pigs flap,
But
but
so,
yeah,
and
it
now
was
this, I always called Russ like the Chemical X, from Powerpuff Girls, where you had like you and me and Matt, and we already hung out, liked each other, had worked together on other projects, and then bringing in this new hire, this younger guy who just like had the chops to do this kind of heavy duty for real action script stuff, uh, just made the magic for real, as you say, like
mhm.
recoded it from scratch. Uh, and then began like the sort of the most exciting 2, 3, 4 months of like my professional career, working with you and Russ and Matt to just go and just make this game and just make it fun and fast and beautiful. And so we just like, it just all came together like incredibly. It was something like in less than 3 months we started from basically from nothing. Like I think it was like 2.5 months from we hire Russ to, okay, this game has been completely recoded. A bunch of new art has been made. We've actually got it all the way up to a point where we can like put out a preview of it on Facebook, right? But before we get to the preview, I just want to talk about one of the most exciting elements that came as a result of the sort of interior development. So like of course, now that you were on board and we were doing it sort of in the mode of one of our blitz games, right? So that meant it had a leaderboard, right? So and all of a sudden it was like, okay, so now I'm not just playing against myself, I'm playing against all my buddies. And so like internally it wasn't visible to the public, but internally we could play it on Facebook and see the leaderboard. And the key thing that came from that was the friend flapples, right? Which is, and you recall that. So the
Oh, of
idea
course, yeah.
there is that you start a game, you've got a leaderboard. The leaderboard is a set of scores. And as you play, as you beat those scores, it would make a flapple with like your Facebook friend's profile pic on it, and you could grab that flapple for like 3 extra flaps. And then so that did like a bunch of different things. One, it helped you, obviously, right? Two, you could go like, I just caught your flapple, buddy. You could yell it across like, got your flapple, Piro. Like, and
Hero's always a target.
yeah,
But continue on. Yes, yeah.
but not just that, but also it's like a form of cooperative, competitive gameplay that created what I would call a virtuous cycle, rather than a vicious cycle, but a virtuous one, in the sense that like because the more friends you had playing this game, the better it was for you and the better it was for them, because that meant more flapples, right? More opportunity for everyone to get higher. It was like you were building a ladder where you could, after you got up to a certain height, you could start taking rungs off the bottom of the ladder and placing them higher up, right? So everyone was sort of involved in this process over the course of, I think we would reset the leaderboards every week,
Once a week.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would often happen in like Zuma Blitz or Bejeweled Blitz is you'd play for a bit until you got what you knew was like a really kick-ass score, and then you'd kind of be
Mhm.
done, right? You'd be like, okay, you might come back and play, but you're like, that's my score, and
Unless
that's what
someone
I'm
beats
gonna.
you and you feel obsessed. Yeah, that was the
Right.
catch.
Whereas with Pig Up, all of a sudden the leaderboard became a dynamic part of the gameplay, right? And
Hmm.
so you know, even if you played and got this really good score, if you waited a couple of days, more players would have come in, put more scores on the leaderboard. That meant that you had more rungs in this ladder to do better on your next run, right? So it was this fantastic, social engagement mechanism that did not exist at the time. And as far as I know, I still do not know of any.
It is similar to when you're playing a racing game where you're doing a time trial by yourself, but people you're connected with or friends with, you'll see their ghost car. And so that's one thing. That's one other kind of game where that exists in is you'll see a ghost car, and that's your buddy in their time. But there was no interaction with that would
Right.
help you at all. So the flapple, the friend flapples was kind of an extended version of that mechanic. Took
Yeah.
it a step further in a social
And
environment.
really, to my mind, activated that social
Mhm.
interaction, right? It's like now your game and your friends' games, you've got reasons to have more friends play. They have reasons to play more often. It just makes it more fun, right? Like it brings your friend into your game in a very natural, easy to understand way, and you into your friends' games. And it's not just a ghost, right? It's actually like it has an impact on your game, right? Like
Exactly,
it's better.
exactly.
It's a virtuous cycle. So that was just such an exciting component that was only able to be brought into the game as a result of really up leveling from this goofball prototype that I made to like a full development thing where we had your expertise with the Blitz games and Russ's coding chops. So
Mhm.
that was such an amazing thing, and really super exciting. And so you're gonna say,
Oh no, just yeah, it was a great combination of people to bring together, and we were all kind of really riding this wave of productivity at the time too, like just years of game making experience, and then just kind of the relationships we'd established around the studio. with the various components that went into making it. Like everyone was operating as like a finely honed machine, and there were some good development experiences over the years, but this one really did feel like kind of a pinnacle. And it was interesting because it was happening the same time that the company was just inflating to this great height where it could be sold off. So it was kind of it was all happening at once, basically.
Well, right, yeah, and I can't remember exactly why, but there was some reason we couldn't use the title When Pigs Flap, so we had to do the new name thing, which is, like, it was a very common exercise at PopCap. Was like we would have some game and we would be used to it having some name. Lawn of the Dead being the biggest example of just like, of course this game's Lawn of the Dead, and then very far down
And
the
then
line
no.
being told no, we can't use that name, and then we have to spend months trying to figure out what the name should be. And so we did the same thing with with When Pigs Flap and landed on Pig Up. And I think we actually, like, some of the materials that you shared sort of showed how we did that. I think we did some A/B tests of just different names, and we just picked one of the ones that like rated highly, and Pig Up,
Yeah, yeah,
rated
yeah.
highly.
It was
So
short and
that was a
sweet.
yeah, but it was a case of like actually using some of these metrics, right? And going
Hmm.
again, and very different from the way that we would do stuff for games like Peggle and Bookworm, um, where we had beta testers, but this notion of actually going out in a sense of the public and trying, saying here's like six choices, let's see which one people respond to, and just getting the data about like what title do people excite people most, and just going, okay, well, like, let's, I guess
Yeah,
that answers that, right? Like,
there's kind of worth talking about is when we started our beta testing for that game. Also, there we tapped into kind of a new thing that was starting to happen at the time for QA, where there was a website. I can't remember what it was called, but where you literally could spend $100 and then you could get 20, 30, however many different people to play your game for a while and give detailed feedback on the gameplay. And so we started utilizing that at different levels of our early development just to get some outside eyes on it that weren't kind
right.
of contaminated by knowledge of anything else. And that was really illuminating, along with the feedback we were getting from around the studio. And it really helped to shape that early game. And then yeah, looking at some of the notes and docs that we've dug up, I had forgotten that we did manage to get together a really big beta testing pool before it was all over. We had a lot of people playing that game
Yeah,
when
and a
we
lot of
pulled the
excitement.
plug.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, spoilers, but
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let
I
me
mean,
get ahead of
we
myself
already
there.
did, in the title does spoil it, but zipping along, we just like got to get these four dudes, just boom bang, like got this thing up and running to like a professional level where we could show people. There was actually live on Facebook as a preview. You could go now, like, and I made a bunch of like postcards with the URL to hand out at Comic Con that year, just to go like play Pig Up, man. Like, and then there was an article in Wired. We'll put a link in the description, where the I'll just do a couple of quotes from it. Allow me to introduce you to the game that caused you to not get any work done today. It is horribly addictive. I got up at 7 a.m. thanks to the garbage truck, started playing Pig Up, and I have done almost nothing since. So this is a Wired article that incredibly is still on the internet. This was the kind of like excitement about this new game, at least from our point of view. It's like, okay, like, this is a potentially a new exciting franchise, especially since so much of the work that Matt had done had really invested this world with like texture and layers and flavor, where it's like, this is an aspirational game. You are a pig, you're this flying hero of a pig. You've got this like sort of mechanic buddy who just sort of runs the, like, literally you would be in a pickup truck with a giant pig launching cannon in the back of the pickup, and you would just travel. Like, it's kind of like the Wright brothers sort of thing, where the pigs are trying to conquer flight.
Yeah, there was a you're getting close to where we had determined a theme for it all that was we all thought was pretty amusing and pretty easy. Like, it was defined. Like, we had a defined theme, which was Steam Pig, which is
Yeah,
essentially like the idea of steampunk and the sort of just scrappy patch together sort of kind of aesthetics of steampunk as it meets with hillbillies out in the fields of the Midwest. Unfortunately launching pigs out of cannons, but
Yeah,
but
and
fortunately that pig could fly. So
well, that pig could, yeah. And so there was just like, so for my end, not just as the designer, but like as the kind of narrative driver of this game, along with Matt, sort of just implying so much crunchiness and tastiness about just the world, and it was just like this is a really involving thing. It's a fun game, and the world we've created is cool, and like it's so expandable. We started adding power-ups and blah blah blah. So this is now this is where the rise part of the story comes to its apex with the award. Ed Allard, who was one of the execs at the time, gave our team an award, and now I've forgotten what the award was called. It was like the first big up annual award for game excellence that was supposed to really like recognize, not it was basically just like this team, not just that this is a good game, but this team is just doing everything right. They're fast, they're knocking it out, they're taking feedback, they're improving the game. They're this like
it was an
all
appreciated
teams at
gesture for
PopCap
sure.
should be trying to be like this team, right?
Hmm.
And so but then in my notes I have like tiny team delivering results at a blistering pace. We just busted out in all the best way possible. And so we made a prize and gave it to us in this little ceremony. But the seeds of doom were in that prize
Yeah, it
because
was the body of the pig. There was yeah, we'll show a picture of it. Maybe right there we pop a picture of it,
yeah.
but it was just a rotten piece of fruit. I think it was
Well,
a
I mean, it
mango
was
or
it was a yeah. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be rotten, but the idea was he bought a little trophy base, then took a yam, and then jammed a bunch of pieces like
like
Mr.
a Mr.
Potato Head
Potato Head
Yed's
pieces to it.
pieces into it, and so like right then and there, it looked fun. It looked like, oh, here, see, it's like it's your pig, right? And he gave us this award, but at the same time, we were like, well, there's a vegetable in the core of
That
this
thing's gonna
thing.
die.
Like this, yeah, it's I mean, this award that you were giving us is gonna be a pile of moldy slime in like a week and a half. And somehow, incredibly, I think we've talked about this before, but like I don't think I've never had the chance to talk to Ed about this, but it was like I don't think that this was intended as a metaphor,
No,
but
they were
like
really
it
trying to encourage us and let us know that we'd been doing all the things right for
yeah, but
sure.
and yet somehow it just somehow escaped Ed's notice that he had constructed an award, the central component of which was a thing that was like had a timer on it, was destined to disintegrate. It was so
Yep, yep.
crazy. I mean, so and we were pumped. We were like, "Yeah, thank you for the recognition." Though we even at the time we were like, "Well, yeah, but you do know that this award is we're not going to be able to pass it
This is
on
not
to
going to sit
someone
on the
next
desk for more than
year."
another week. This
Yeah,
is
right. And as it turns out, like again, I don't think Ed meant it to
no.
be kind of a harbinger of doom, but it was because then we started getting. Now we're into the fall where it's like as you were saying before, where it's like, well, we had all these metrics. Like we were one of the first teams to actually really start bringing in modern analytics about things like retention, right? Like if someone
Mhm.
played once, how long, did they play again? Like, uh, and that's all of a sudden where things just started to start going a little squirrely, right?
Well, it's interesting because at that point it was like the directive is anything that PopCap does needs to be just this huge earner. It needs to be the next big game coming
Yeah, it
out,
has to be the biggest hit ever right out of the box.
yeah, and we were making games in such a way where they would slowly climb up to some of these great heights, but it was just right out of the gate, through 4 months of development at most, like is not probably doesn't look that way. And I think coming from on high, I definitely got the sense there was a last minute rush of design ideas is there a way that we can save this game in the light of the fact that EA wants these huge, multi-million dollar franchises quick? And so I would start getting into meetings that were like, how can we make Pig Up more like Farmville?
Yeah,
And and
well,
and it started to be that thing where I was realizing that PopCap was no longer making original IP as much as it was chasing the successful IP of other companies, which was a huge difference for us. That's not what
right.
we had done up to that point. We had made games that were kind of clones of other games, and but it was all kind of just in the spirit of like fun game making. It
Well,
wasn't,
yeah, I mean, I'll say that one
yeah,
of the things I always liked, or I always would say about PopCap in that early era, that pre-EA era, was like chumps look at a success and try to copy it. What PopCap did was they would look at flops and make them into hits.
yeah,
So we
yeah. They
would
find that fun
go,
thing.
where it's like, oh, there's this game that has this really cool mechanic, but it's got a kind of, it's not very, it doesn't look very good. But if we took this mechanic and made it look awesome, then we'd have a game like Zuma,
Hmm.
right? Which originally, I think was like a game called Puzzle Loop or
Puzzle
something,
loop, yeah.
which I think was only released in Japan. We had it on our MAME cabinet. So that was what PopCap was really good at, was sort of seeing those diamonds in the rough in terms of the mechanics, and then going, yeah, but if we bring a lot of art and polish and charm to these games, we can take things that flopped and make them into hits. And then, as you say, that changed where all of a sudden we were sort of like, oh, there's this hit, so we should probably start doing what the hit did. It's like, that's not us, man. That has not been what has led to our success in the past. Uh,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
as you say, all of a sudden we'd hit this apex. Like the preview would come out, the Wired article was out. We were like super pumped. We got notes from Riccatello, and then all of a sudden, just it seemed, and for me, my visibility on this was pretty low because you were the producer, so you were the guy that was actually having the meetings with all the execs. And the execs, I mean, I think part of our that stuff that you had sort of listed out like who all the people in the room would be, and it was something like 8 people,
Yeah,
seven
you were in
or
that
eight
one. You
people,
you were in a lot of the big exec meetings too. There were a couple little one-offs here and there where I went and sat with Sukhbir, I went and sat with Ed and talked to people about it.
and it was
Uh,
it was just disappointing because like I do recall the one where we were sort of going over these metrics, and it was Alison Bylas who was like the only person there who actually was qualified to analyze any of these metrics. But that didn't stop all these execs for thinking they were qualified to analyze these metrics. And it was just like, oh yeah, this retention is no good. And we're kind of like, well, and Alice would say, I don't
it's
know.
in
There's
beta.
actually there's some potential here, and we were like, well, okay, but this is a preview, right? I mean, like you explicitly forbade us from putting any of these retention mechanics into this preview. It's just a snapshot of this game. It doesn't make sense to start evaluating it as though it was like a full bore game. But and then, as you said, all of a sudden we started to get like one exec would come and say, "Okay, what you really need to do is you need to sort of build it out more. You need to build the world out more, and more stages, and more levels, and more enemies."
Agreed.
And we were like, "Yeah, no kidding. That's
That's
what
the
we plan to
plan.
do." But then we'd have somebody else going, "I don't know, like the fact that you need to rethink the mechanics." It's because right now some games go long, and we really, the sweet spot for the length of a game needs to be about a minute and a half. So you really need to kind of you have to rethink the mechanics and cap it so that all the games come. Maybe it should just be a timer, and they're just so all of a sudden now these execs were just sort of coming at us with lots of different ideas, helpful
Hmm.
ideas, uh, without consulting each other about telling us what they thought our priorities should be.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
somewhere along the line, they just were like, actually, we're canceling it. And I don't think I was present at a meeting where they told us that. I think they just told you that? I don't know. What was your memory of the cancellation? I don't have a
Uh,
specific time and date or memory of being told that.
God, I don't exactly either. A lot of that stuff it's funny because there's this metaphor that we're using in this episode where the development was a lot like playing a game of Pig Up, where you crash into the ground at some point. But it was also it all happened so fast. We're up in the peak of it, and there's just so much stuff flying at us. Like even that is kind of analogous to. Um, yeah, the game and what we were going through, and I don't remember exactly how it all came down. We
But
hit a
it
bunch of
did. It
keys
did.
and we got
Yeah. And at
we
some
got
point
punked into the ground.
after like a month earlier having told us and the whole company, everybody be like these guys. These guys are like the are doing what everyone should be doing at this company to make awesome new games. Everyone follow their example, and then like a month and a half later going, and we're canceling their game. And
Yeah.
uh
It was
so and
it was disheartening and sudden, but it also came at a time where there was all the talk of dividing up our big IP into separate franchises and getting, reassigning folk. There was a place for each of us in that structure, which is appreciated, of course. They didn't just like, your Pig Up's not working, you're out of here. They had plans for us, and
well,
so I
and
think
so
that became bigger than can we launch this new IP.
right, which you could argue back and forth on that, but
Mhm.
like so is the end of the fall like you this is the bitter pill is the conversation that you had with Jason later where he said dot dot dot.
Yeah, yeah, it was much later as I went to work at Blue Wizard for a while, and there was just a brief conversation about it where I learned that I'm not sure if it was always this way. I don't want to totally, misquote or anything, but
But your memory
he
of this
referenced the
conversation
project
that you yeah.
as being busy work for us. Like Pig Up was busy work as the company was getting ready to make this big structural shift. And so it kept us going. It kept us finely honed, and also, we kind of integrated the metrics collection, the stats collection, in that, and got it ready for other games like Solitaire Blitz and other things that were
Right.
happening at the time. And so there was a bunch of worth that came out of it, but the game itself was like busy work, and he
That's
just
yeah.
kind of dismissed it as such in a short conversation, and.
Which to
That
me is just
I
the
could see
go
that.
ahead.
That made sense. It was unfortunate though because we had such a good thing going.
Well, yeah, I thought so. I mean, it was a pretty rough thing to hear you tell me that story years later of basically, oh, we were never serious about this game. And so now like in the and basically being told, yeah, we just used that to put you guys in a holding pattern for a few months while we figured out what to do with Peggle 2 because that's where you guys are all going to go. Obviously, like this whole podcast in a lot of ways is sort of predicated on the idea that we are telling our stories from our perspective, so we don't know everything that ever went on. A lot of our stories, or at least mine, is kind of seeing the results of decisions made in the higher up executive level and not being actually privy to any of those direct conversations, right? Just sort of having to take what we were given, right?
Hmm.
Though, like so in the aftermath, I kind of go like, so my basic feeling is like, obviously, I feel a great deal of pride in what we were able to accomplish in that crazy short amount of time. Like that award that Ed gave us, as sort of insanely compromised as it was in its physical design, um, really did, you know, speak to something about what we were able to achieve. And it and but at the same time, I got to admit, like I feel some bitterness about the decision, right? For one, I just sort of feel like if that was truly the case that they were never serious about the game and it was just busy work, I think like, well, you can sort of justify that however you like from the executive level, but if that was the case, then they were lying to us.
I can see a case for it being dual purpose. Like if say Riccatello saw it and was like, oh man, we gotta lean into this one, or if there was some just crazy, almost impossible spark that blasted up through the leadership, and they just, maybe then it would have been like, okay, let's fully go on with this. But you
Yeah, I
know,
mean, I think that's a fair reading, right? That sort of takes some of the edge off of my reading. Is that like I don't think any of the people involved in the executive level ever sort of saw it that way. Like, yes, we are
mhm.
deliberately misleading these employees of ours to, uh, and of course, I don't think they would appreciate being called liars about it. So let's say
Geez,
that yeah, it
Steve.
was more just like, oh well, like this is this in the back of our minds. This we know that this is busy work for them, but who knows? Maybe if it absolutely blows up, and maybe if like all those numbers that we assumed that that if they had been like just crazy ridiculous numbers instead of numbers that from our perspective were like, okay, yes, this thing isn't the most popular thing on the internet and it doesn't have like 100% retention after like a week, but it's kind of absurd to require that from something that's essentially a preview. uh Obviously we had lots of reasons to say this should go forward, and 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 they had their reasons to say that it should not. And it's a bummer, and I do think like it was a giant missed opportunity because I believe that there was enough strength in our team and there was enough strength in the game itself that like it could actually have been another one of these like great PopCap franchises. As the guy who wrote the Wired article sort of seemed to intuit when he played it, it was like, hey, this is just a preview, but it's addictive as hell and fun, and it's
Yeah, yeah. And it was also happening at a time where there was this kind of like want to kill off games early on and not waste too much time on them, and that seemed to be like a new kind of like edgy, well, I don't know, edgy, a new sort of like corporate approach that we're going to try to take as a company. Like, oh, we can't let these things just, like wander around too long. We got to like kill it off
yeah.
and start the new project.
And I
And
remember that as well. I mean, like this idea, it's like, oh, we it's such a weird thing that we like so many ideas seem to manifest themselves out of nowhere again in this era that we talked about last episode about like this is the transition era. This is where PopCap is sort of changing from the exciting company where just a bunch of people who love games just got together and just made games as good as they could to we are now trying to be like a responsible game company and one that is attractive to a buyer. And so many of these sort of like articles of faith seem to just come out of nowhere, like, oh, we spend too much time on these games, like Plants vs Zombies. It took like 2.5 years to make that game. And it's kind of like, to me, I hear that and I go, why is that your takeaway? Yes, I guess it would have been great if the entirety of Plants vs. Zombies had only taken 1 year instead of 2.5 years to make. But why are you looking at this, which is a success, and go, yeah, but it only should have taken half as much time, and just assuming and that therefore,
and then it would have been
every
just
game
as
has,
great a game
yeah.
somehow. Like,
Like particularly the case of Pig Up, where it's like, okay, so this game was like already like a playable game. We could have actually just turned. I mean, we had the hooks for people to actually start spending coins on the power ups. That could have been on when the game could have been making money in that
mhm.
preview phase, and they said no, we're not allowed to do it. And we were like, okay, but
Well,
this
I think that it might have been also the beginning of the end for just Blitz games in general, whether they knew it or not. Because I know it wasn't too much later. There was, we of course did the all of the Peggle 2 work, and then I kind of split. But it wasn't too much later, a year or two later, that they killed Zuma Blitz off. Even though I'd heard behind the scenes it was still making a lot of money, but it wasn't making enough money. It wasn't Madden or Battlefield money. It was. not
Well,
enough money, and it bummed a lot of people out. They just axed it, much like they did Motor City Online a decade prior.
yeah,
Just
that is
doesn't
certainly the
matter.
thing. I mean, like, my read on EA was they were the kind of giant company where, like, they would rather spend $90 million to make $100 million than spend 2 million to make 15 million.
Hmm.
Why? Even though you would go, well, wait a minute, not only is 2 to 15 vastly more profitable, obviously, it's like, almost 10 times return versus investment, but also it's even larger in terms of the number of dollars. But to EA, $15 million is just not enough to move their needle. They just don't care. It doesn't matter to them if that's essentially $13 million of free money. They would rather spend the 90 to get 100 because the 100 million of revenue is all that their shareholders care about, and they don't care or
Yeah,
even
yeah.
know how much was spent in order to earn that. They just want the big number, and so that way of looking at things, I think, is just crazily short-sighted and very much the opposite of the way we did things back in the quote golden era.
Yeah, it's really just illustrates that strange collision of big business and a creative entity, and where they try to meet and have that symbiotic relationship, and it's just there's a lot of wreckage and confusion that it transpires. But well,
Yeah,
so it goes.
that's what happens.
The pig hits the ground.
Exactly, that's the game. Well, okay, so I guess we're already getting a little long here, so let's wrap it up here by once again kind of so now this is the end. We'll tell our listeners that our plan was to record and get in the can 3 episodes. This is the third of those three. So we haven't yet been in a position to actually take on like listener remarks or comments. Like, if so, you know, if this is going to go up on YouTube, put your questions in the comments. Sort of pitch ideas to us about episodes, stuff you want to hear us talk about. Hammer that like and subscribe button. Tell your friends. Tell your mom. Whether or not your mom is your friend, let's assume she is. Uh, uh, Isaac, anything you want to add to that?
Just we've got a lot of different stuff we want to talk about in the future, and but it is all kind of open to suggestion as well. If people want to hear us talk about different aspects of things, it'd be fun to talk about. We can really drill down into game design. We can also talk about the culture and just some of the hysterical stuff that happened along the way too. There's a lot of different stories to be told for sure.
Like, I think we'll
So.
definitely we'll do a few more where we kind of go, okay, let's talk about this game or that game,
Speaking of which, I think Plants vs. Zombies is going to be a big one that probably should be at least, if not our next episode, the one after. But
yeah,
that's one we would like to get some other folks on board for and see if we can some in the core team's perspectives out of it. So we're
right.
going to work on that because we
Yeah.
know that that's is just going to be a wanted thing.
Yeah, I think PVZ is definitely going to be more than just one episode's worth of stuff, and because we've got lots to say about that. And again, we by now we at that point we should be able to have some guests maybe, and so yeah, let us know what you think. Tell us what you want to hear. Like and subscribe, and until then, this has been the third episode of the unofficial PopCap PopCast. Oh, what?